Yeah, we're good. No, we're good.
They should be able to hear me in Zoom. You can hear me in Zoom? Okay, excellent.
Yes, we can hear you in
All
Zoom.
right. Good morning, everybody. How are we today? Everybody ready to wrap up an awesome week? Yes, thank you for being here. So it is my pleasure to introduce Derek Bruff to all of you. Derek Bruff, PhD, is an educator, higher ed consultant, and the author of 2 books, Intentional Tech: Principles to Guide the Use of Educational Technology in College Teaching, and Teaching with Classroom Response Systems, Creating Active Learning Environments. He writes a weekly newsletter called Intentional Teaching and produces the Intentional Teaching podcast. Bruff directed the Vanderbilt University Center for Teaching for more than a decade, where he helped faculty and other instructors develop foundational teaching skills and explore new ideas in teaching. He consults regularly with faculty and administrators across higher education on issues of teaching, learning, and faculty development. Bruff's major accomplishments while leading the CFT include building a students as producers approach to course design into CFT programming as a way to help faculty at a research university rethink their teaching and engage their students in deep learning, integrating learning management system and other instructional technology support into the CFT to help instructors teach in a variety of modalities: in person, synchronous, asynchronous, online, and hybrid, and guiding the strategic development of the Vanderbilt Center for Teaching as it went from 8 to 14 full-time staff positions. Bruff has a PhD in mathematics and has taught math courses at Vanderbilt and Harvard University. Currently, he is visiting associate director, Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, University of Mississippi. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Derek Bruff.
Thank you for that introduction. Can you guys hear me okay back there? Yeah, okay. I'm gonna press some buttons on my computer because that's the thing we do. Let's see, I'm gonna hide this. I'm gonna say okay right there. And I think we're ready to go. Thank you for joining me here on this last session. I'm very excited to spend a little time with you all and talk about teaching with technology, one of my favorite subjects. Couple of bits of business. I do have a website up there, derekbruff.org. You can go there to learn more about what I'm up to and find links to my podcast and newsletter and things like that. Also, I've given you a tiny URL and a QR code to get to my slides if you'd like. So the tiny URL is /CIT Bruff. And so that should get you to my slide deck if you want to follow along now or check it out later. Either way, sometimes I put links and additional information in the notes field of the slides. So if you're interested in that, go for that. Yeah, I think I want to jump right into my first activity. So let's see. Yep, my clicker's not working, so that's ideal. So I'm going to poll you here. We're going to switch over to Poll Everywhere. We're going to use Poll Everywhere a few times this morning. And what I want you to do is to find someone to talk to near you and put your heads together and come up with a list of 5 or 6 of your favorite technologies for use in teaching contexts. Okay? I kind of want to see what's in your zone of teaching with technology. And so that's working. Excellent. And so once you have your list, you can log on to Poll Everywhere. So you've got a couple of options. There's a giant QR code, which is handy. Or you can go to pollev.com/DerekBruff. Don't search for pollev.com/DerekBruff. Put it in the address bar of your web browser, like it's 1999. And that should get you to this poll right here. All right. So again, your job is to find a friend or make a friend with a neighbor, come up with a list of 5 to 6 technologies you like to see in teaching contexts, and then submit it up here. Ready, set, go. Oh, excellent. All right, if you haven't started entering your lists, please do so. Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right. We've got 10 more seconds. So in just a second, I'm going to ask Poll Everywhere to make a word cloud out of your responses. You might have seen this coming. So we're going to word cloud your responses. So the more frequently a word appears among your collected responses, the larger it will be. I'm very interested to see how this shakes up. I ask a version of this question often when I'm presenting to faculty, and I'll say, what are 5 to 6 technologies you use or have seen used? I change it to your favorite technologies because you've just spent a couple of days thinking about teaching with technology. And so you've seen a lot of stuff, but I'm curious to know what some of your favorites are. So let's see how that looks. That was anticlimactic. Here it comes. All right, I'm going to have to lock this down so it doesn't dance on us. There, it's locked. Wow. Okay. What do you notice there? So I see a lot of Google, a lot of Zoom, a lot of Padlet, some Kahoot. Padlet. Score for Padlet. Padlet's the one I always forget about, but it's really awesome. I went for like 4 years and couldn't remember the name of it. This is probably the longest tail I've ever seen when asking this question. Like there's so many one-off responses here. I see some clickers, I see some Flipgrid, Quizlet, Puzzle, Sticky, which might go with notes maybe somewhere else on the board. I do see a GPT in there. Almanac with a CK. What is Almanac with a CK? Hold on. Let's practice 2 things. Can you press the microphone on your table and also tell us your first name?
Almanac is course design using AI. Many activities.
Nice. Oh, that thing. Yes. Course design using AI for Almanac. Okay, that was a new one to me. I see some hypothesis, some polling. I see a Copilot. There's some more AI. What about, I have one more question. Actually, I have several questions, but what is Parley? P-A-R-L-E-Y? Hold on.
Yes, autocorrect.
Autocorrect? Oh, from Padlet. Okay, all right. It was meant to be Padlet. Okay, great. I did. Parley sounds like an interesting name for something, so that's good. Okay. I don't. There's a lot of words up there, but I do not see my favorite educational technology. Go back to the slideshow here. My favorite educational technology is wheels on chairs. And I took that photo about an hour ago in one of the classrooms. So I was happy to see these chairs don't have wheels generally. I think none of them do. But many of the classrooms here have wheels on their chairs. And I share that for a couple of reasons. One is the main reason is that, I teach math courses. And when I walk into my classroom, I have a plan for the day. I have a set of learning activities that I think will be helpful for my students. And I really appreciate it when the furniture in the room is flexible enough to support my learning activities, right? If we want to do small groups, big groups, discussion, whatever it is, when the chairs have wheels, we can move them around more easily and do the things that I have planned. And so the principle there is that I come in with my learning objectives and I want the technology to support those learning objectives. And I think that's really important. We have to lead with our pedagogy and then find the tools that are going to help us do that, implement that pedagogy, right? So that's one key principle when we talk about technology and teaching, is that we do need to lead with the pedagogy. And I really love tools that are flexible enough to kind of support a variety of pedagogies. The other reason I mention this is because when we think about teaching with technology, we often think about digital internet-enabled technologies. But we all teach with technology all the time, right? There's always furniture in the room, there's lighting, there's HVAC, there's chalkboards, right? These are just technologies that are analog, and I would say more familiar, right? We know what we can do with a chalkboard. We don't entirely know what we're going to do with AI, right? Like, we're figuring that out collectively. And so we often spend a lot of time thinking about the digital stuff because we are figuring out collectively. But analog technology has its place as well. So I love thinking about teaching with technology. I love not so much like making an instructor's job more efficient, although that's important, but I really like thinking about how can we create different kinds of learning experiences through technology. And so a few years ago, I talked to a lot of faculty about how they use technology, and I started to see some patterns in that use. And so I ended up writing this book called Intentional Tech. It has 7 principles for guiding the use of technology, because if you write a book with principles, there have to be 7 of them. I think that's a rule somewhere. And my publisher described it not so much as a how-to, but more of a why-to. Like, why would you adopt technology? What are the things that technology tends to be good for when it comes to supporting student learning? So what I want to do today is kind of walk through 3 of those principles for you. I won't do all 7, that's too much for an hour, but 3 of those principles, ones that I think have a nice connection to inclusive and equitable teaching, all right? So we're going to kind of blend these 2 lenses of inclusive teaching and teaching with technology. And so my first principle is that of practice and feedback. This is a picture of me a few years ago. This was when I learned to ski at age 40. I do not recommend doing that. Frankly, if you're above the age of like 12, don't learn to ski. It's too late. Like it's easy when you're 6 to learn how to ski. It's hard to learn when you're 40. I spent the entire first day on the mountain having no ability to control my descent down the slopes whatsoever. And so other than falling, right? I could throw myself into the mountain, and that's how I stopped. The second day, I kind of learned this wedge thing, right? They tell you to do the pizza, and somehow that's going to slow you down. What they don't tell you is you have to activate about 8 different muscle groups in just the right way to do that, and that it's exhausting. So I did that all day. The third day, I slept until noon because I was really tired. My soon-to-be father-in-law gave me some tips on doing the French fry down the mountain where you have parallel skis. It was much easier. By the 4th day, I smiled, right? I had a smidge of fun on the 4th day. And I share that because in kind of physical skill realms, we naturally assume that if you're going to get better at something, you're going to have to practice doing that thing, right? You can't learn to ski by watching skiers on YouTube. You have to get out there, you have to practice. And every time I fell down, or every time my legs got tired, or every time I sped up, right? All those things are giving me biophysical feedback about my skiing skills. And I can use that feedback to get better over time. Cognitive skills are not physical skills, right? But this notion of practice and feedback is still really important to how students learn. And technology can often help us provide this much needed practice and feedback to our students. Let me set this up a little bit. So I'm a big fan of polling. We're going to use Poll Everywhere a few times today. There's lots of polling systems out there. In my statistics class that I teach, I will often ask my students near the beginning of the semester, we start our unit on probability, and I will ask them this question. Your cousin calls to say she's having twins. Assume it's not identical twins. Which of the following is most likely? Twin boys, twin girls, 1 boy and 1 girl, or are all 3 of those equally likely? And this is a little screenshot of me asking that question on Poll Everywhere. This was actually a group of faculty that I asked, but I get the very same distribution when I talk to my students. which is to say, I ask which of these are more likely, and most of the responses are either option C, one boy and one girl, or option D, all three of those options are equally likely. Now, in my class, what I'll do is I'll have students all vote on this, right? They're all thinking about this particular concept. I get to see the distribution. I will usually show them this distribution because it makes it pretty clear that there's not kind of an obvious consensus answer for this question. And then I will ask them to turn to their neighbor and talk out this question. Put their heads together. If they both have the same answer, talk about it anyway, because you could both be wrong, right? And then all of a sudden, I've got these pairs and trios of students all around the classroom talking about this probability question. And then I will repoll them, and I usually get something a little bit like this. There's some shift that happens after that peer discussion. And I will say now, since we're not doing this as an activity, that it's a shift towards the right answer in this case. It doesn't always move that direction, but often it does. And with this question, at this point, I'll then ask some of my students to share their reasoning with the whole class, right? If I were in a room like this, we would press the button, we would say our first name, we would go and share, why did you think it was C? Why do you think it's D? Why did you change your mind, right? Usually, the one person who's stuck on twin boys wants to speak up at this point and defend their answer, and I'm happy to hear that, right? And then in this case, I can do a simulation with my students. So I used to have them flip coins, but no one has pocket change anymore. So we flip ID cards, right? And I say, look, we're mathematicians, not biologists, so we're going to make some simplifying assumptions. We're going to assume two sexes, male and female, and we're going to assume that they occur 50-50, right? Real life is more complicated, but for our model, that's what we're going to assume. So take your ID card, and again, don't do this right now. But I tell my students, take your ID card, assign one side to boy, one side to girl, flip your card twice, and then report your results using the polling system. And at that point, it's really clear that about half the room gets one boy and one girl. And then I give them my explanation, right? That in fact, it's really, you have kind of four equally likely outcomes. You have boy, 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 girl, girl, boy, girl, girl. And two of those are kind of grouped together here. And the reason I go through all this with my students is because there's a real misconception that I find that is very common among my students and among the faculty that I work with, that when it comes to probability, all things are equally likely. And I really need to kind of disabuse them of that assumption, right? We need to kind of model more carefully what we're doing. Some things are equally likely, some things are not. And so I'll spend 20 minutes of class time on this activity at the beginning of the unit, because if we don't get that misconception resolved, it's going to be a problem throughout the entire unit. What I'd like to point out is that part of what I'm trying to do by using the polling system is I want to actually reach all of my students around this misconception, right? I really want to hear from all of them. What do you think now? What do you think about it after you talk to your peer? I want everyone to be involved in it, not just the handful of students who will speak up and share their reasoning with the whole class, but all the other students as well. And so polling is a great tool to try to get all of your students involved in this practice and feedback. The method I use is often called peer instruction. Ask a question, have students think about it and vote, look at the results. I love the kind of right branch there, where the students are split among a couple of choices, because then we'll talk to each other about it. We'll do a second vote, we'll do a class discussion, right? I'll provide my explanation eventually after they've had time to think about it. Occasionally, we fall in one of the other categories where most of them are wrong on a math question, in which case having them talk to each other is less useful. I'll need to backtrack somehow, maybe ask a simpler question or provide an explanation. Sometimes they're all got it, right? If 90% of them have it right, we won't spend much more time on this. We'll spend a little more time on it because some of them were guessing and 10% got it wrong, but we won't spend as much time on something that most of them have understood. So it gives me some flexibility as an instructor. I wrote a whole book on this. It was my first book from 2009, Teaching with Classroom Response Systems. And back then, we did not have mobile phones and laptops in the classroom. In 2009, we had flip phones and clickers, we called them, little handheld devices that students can answer A, B, C, or D. If you were in the business back then, you will remember well, eventually we had radio frequency, which was great. Initially, we had infrared, so you actually had to aim it at some kind of receiver at the front of the room. You'll notice on the book cover, there is a subtle graphic representation of a clicker on the left. No one ever notices that until I point it out, but it's really great. Anyway, back then, all we had was multiple choice questions, but you can do a lot with multiple choice questions. I taught a cryptography course at Vanderbilt where we dealt with issues of encryption, privacy, surveillance, things like that. And so I'd ask my students, colleges and universities should be given wide latitude to use electronic surveillance in the interest of campus security, even if that means students' privacy is not always respected. And then I would poll my students, agree or disagree, or strongly disagree. I want to hear again from all of my students about this, because that distribution right there tells me we're going to have a good class discussion today, right? And I would argue that wherever you fall on that, you see you're not alone, right, in this. And so that's going to maybe motivate a few more students to engage in that conversation. Or you can ask something that doesn't have any kind of objective answer. I got this from a history professor, Rob McDougall. When and where would you rather have lived? He gave some times in different parts of the world, right? This is not so much an opinion question as it is a kind of critical thinking question. What do we know about all these things? How do we compare them? There's a lot you can do with multiple choice, but of course, now we have mobile devices of various kinds. And so it kind of broadens the types of polling questions we can ask. This was me asking a group of University of Mississippi faculty last spring, I think. No, I was asking them how they felt about all this AI stuff. And given the hopeful, curious, excited words, I think this was late spring, I think, right? They'd moved past the initial freak out. They were starting to get a little excited. They hadn't thought about actually like what's going to happen in the fall when they have to teach with these tools. So it was well, it wasn't all positive, as you can see. The colorful language there in the bottom right. But word clouds you can do a lot with. I'm learning a lot more about clickable image questions. These are fun. So this was a question I got actually from someone I interviewed for my podcast, Sravanti Kantheti, who teaches anatomy and physiology at community college. And she'll ask her students in this A&P course, where in the heart would you find deoxygenated blood? So she has provided them with this image of the heart, and the students are able to kind of tap on their devices multiple places where they would find deoxygenated blood. And then she gets this heat map kind of showing where her students think that is. And you can see, I don't know the right answers here, but there's clearly some places you would find it. And there's a couple of kind of oddball answers off to themselves, right? So this is another way to get all the students engaged in thinking about this type of question, but using a different kind of medium of sorts. And I found this statistic several years ago. This was a study by some sociologists who observed a lot of college classes. And they found that just 5 to 8 students will account to 75 to 95% of college classroom discussion, regardless of class size. So most of the time, you've got the same 5 to 8 students who are kind of the ones who put their hands up, right? And that's not ideal, right? In fact, what's especially problematic, and they didn't conclude this, but I have observed this, is that often the 5 to 8 students are of a type, right? They're the extroverts, they're the verbal processors, they're the majors, they're the men, they're the white students, whatever it is, they're often of a type. And so you're not hearing from all those other students. In contrast, so I'm going to tell another story. A lot of my stories involve me trying to move my body in new ways. This one is about roller skating in middle school. So the thing to do when I was in middle school in suburban South Carolina, where I was growing up, on a weekend was to go roller skating. And so I would go roller skating with my friends at the skate center. And, you know, I was the guy on the math team. I was not particularly gifted at moving my body in physical ways, but this is what we did. So I went. And I remember the DJ at the skate center would come on the loudspeaker and say things like, "It's time for the hokey pokey." So you were invited to skate out to the middle of the hardwood and do the hokey pokey. You put your right foot in, you put your right foot out, you shake it all about. That required a certain level of balance and coordination that I did not have. So I usually skipped the hokey pokey. The DJ would also come on and say things like, "Now it's time for couples skate." And so you would be invited to take your date and go skate romantically together, just totally something middle schoolers are good at, right? I never had a date, so I skipped those two. But after one of these special purpose activities, the DJ would come on and he would say, now it's all skate. And that meant everyone was invited to skate. All you had to have were skates on your feet and a willingness to try. You didn't have to have a particular skill. You didn't have to have a date. It was all skate. And so that's what I think about when I think about practice and feedback, honestly, because I find that most instructors realize students need to practice this, right? Even my colleagues in the math department, who are sometimes cranky when they talk about teaching, are like, look, math is not a spectator sport. You have to do math in order to learn math. But what I think is hard to do is to create these all-skate environments where we are inviting and encouraging all of our students to engage in that practice and feedback cycle, not just the 5 to 8 students who kind of do it naturally and enthusiastically. And so that's where I start to think about other ways that technology might help us get there. One way that popped up a lot during our year or more of pandemic teaching was what I call a ready, set, go question. Some people call these waterfall questions. So when we were teaching on Zoom and there was a text chat just sitting there waiting for us to use productively, some instructors would pose a question like I did, and then I would ask my students to compose a response, but not to hit enter until I say go. So they all have a chance to think about it, put something in there, and then I say ready, set, go. And then boom, we have, in this case, I had 16 students, so it was manageable, right? We have all their answers there. I'm going to need to take a minute to read through those answers. I would encourage my students to do that as well, right? I might call on some students to elaborate on microphone about their answers. I might invite students to call on their peers. They could nominate a peer to respond and elaborate, right? But what I love about this very simple technique is that it gives a chance for every student to think about the question and compose a response before they see what their peers do. Because that's part of the problem with the 5 to 8 students, is that some students are just hanging back and they're waiting. I don't need to think about this now. I will think about it after someone else has done it, right? And I'll agree with them or I'll piggyback, right? I want every student to have a chance to think this through. And I want to hear from some students who might not volunteer their perspective in a kind of discussion-based class, right? I'm going to hear from different students and hear their ideas as well, which I think is really powerful. This is an example of what's known as the back channel, where right now there's some folks on Zoom who may be having a wonderful conversation on text chat that I can't see. That's the back channel, right? I'm the front channel, the back channel. For all I know, all of you guys are like texting under the table and talking to each other too. That could be a back channel. But there's ways to use the back channel productively. There's lots of different things, kind of moves you can make in the back channel. One thing that I think is helpful, John Kane, who is currently serving as my voice of the chat, right? If I'm running a classroom with even 20 students, let alone 50 or 100 students, it's hard to manage the back channel. But if I can have an assistant or a student maybe that rotates who can kind of be that voice of the chat, I would turn to them occasionally and say, what's happening in the chat that we need to know about, right? One thing that I think is interesting about the back channel is that in 2020, again, everyone had kind of basically moved to Zoom or something similar to teach on. I had written a blog post in 2010 about different things to do on the back channel, back when it was like cutting edge. That blog post was my most read blog post in 2020, even though it was a decade old, right? Because suddenly the technology was just right there and everyone can use it. And I think that's led to more faculty thinking creatively about the back channel. So I read an essay recently by Julia Gossard, who teaches history at Utah State University. She was teaching a course on revolutions, the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And she was having her students engage in these role-playing simulations from the reacting to the past people. So these are kind of well-developed educational role-playing simulations where students have particular roles to play and arguments to have, historical arguments to make. And so she was teaching this class entirely online synchronously. And so she used Slack as her tool of choice to create a back channel so her students could engage in this role-playing through multiple modalities, right? And it was great too, because some of the conversations needed to happen publicly, but different factions of students had to have private conversations, which Slack allowed. So I thought it was a great use of the back channel. So, anyone know what this is? I was at Petrified Forest National Park a couple of years ago, and I was like, why is there a payphone just sitting there, right? This is my reminder that the medium matters. When you give your students options for how they participate, you'll have more students participate. This is one of the things I'd love us to learn from a year of pandemic teaching, which is once you open up text or polling as an option, you're going to hear from more students, right? Not just the students who would kind of verbally participate in our more traditional settings, but how can we build this into our classes on a regular basis? Okay, so I'm going to take a quick little detour into AI land, all right? Because part of the conversation around AI involves practice and feedback, right? The feedback that students get could come from you, it could come from their peers, or maybe from an AI if used thoughtfully. So one kind of framing idea, tools like ChatGPT and all the other tools out there, the language generators, I would say that they speak, but they don't think. They are stringing words together in really, really clever and I would say sophisticated ways that sound like human speech, but they don't know in the same way. They don't think in the same way that humans do. One could argue that, right? There's a kind of semantic connection that they understand how words are related to each other that is some kind of representation of how ideas are connected. But I like to refer to them as wordsmiths, not oracles. And even earlier at breakfast, I was talking to John's ChatGPT, and like my natural inclination is to ask it a question. I wanted to know what cicadas eat, right? We have millions of cicadas in Nashville right now, and they're all in my front yard. It's crazy. But actually, I would say asking a language generator a question with an answer is not kind of the proper use, right? They are putting words together. Now, it may be searching the web, synthesizing something, summarizing for that. The summarizing is how it's being a wordsmith. It's putting words together in useful ways. But I compare it to the way we think about image generators. I went to Midjourney, an AI image generator, and I asked it to give me a robot weaving together words like a giant tapestry. Did it get that right? The dumb question to ask. There's no right answer to that, right? It's a kind of creative remixing of ideas and images, right? And so I think when we think of language generators more like we do image generators, we often land on a more productive use of those tools. So, for instance, I mentioned I interviewed Sravanti Kantheti for my podcast. Again, she's teaching anatomy and physiology to kind of pre-health profession students. She is using a tool called Top Hat in her teaching. It has a kind of polling component, but it also has some nice asynchronous learning tools. And they rolled out something called ACE, which is basically an AI learning assistant built into the platform. So Sravanti had kind of basically built out her course in Top Hat. So all the course materials were in Top Hat. ACE can then read those materials and try to answer questions to students based on those course materials. And I don't know how well this works. This is still pretty new, but Top Hat's goal is to make it kind of a helpful tutor and not just an answer machine, right? But one thing that Sravanti said was that if you're teaching anatomy and physiology, you can do that at a 6th grade level or a medical school level. Her students are somewhere in between. And so what she likes about Top Hat ACE is that it's giving her students explanations based on her course materials. And so it's pitched at the level that they need it, which I think is pretty interesting. And again, it's not an answer machine, but these tools are better when you give them specific materials to work with, to summarize, to outline, right? Or I also interviewed Perry Fasihi for my podcast. And she had actually, she teaches at Boston University in the writing program there. And I don't understand this living in Tennessee. They had a snow day. The rumor is in Tennessee that if you live this far north, you don't have snow days. It's just life, right? You have to go to school anyway. But do you guys have snow days here sometimes? Okay, all right. Anyway, very confusing. In Tennessee, we get a 1/4 inch of snow or ice and we're done. Like everyone stays home. But she was having a snow day. She was going to have her students do peer review in class that day. But since it was a snow day, there was no class. So she had her students do peer review with ChatGPT. So she sent them to ChatGPT, and she didn't just say, look, have ChatGPT give you feedback on your papers. She gave them very specific prompts to use with ChatGPT. Like evaluate the evidence used to support the main argument. Is the evidence relevant, sufficient, and effectively integrated into the argument? Or how well does the paper analyze the implications of digital technology on academic integrity and authorship? What insights or unique perspectives does the paper offer? So something more kind of specific to the assignment. And she found that her students generally reported ChatGPT gave them very interesting things to think about. Again, this is wordsmith work, not answer work. She also had her students revise their essays and highlight the parts they had changed as a result of their interaction with ChatGPT, and then write a little summary of kind of why they made the changes that they did. And I love this, right? She is trying to teach them specific writing skills. So she is having the robot give them feedback specific to those skills, and then engaging students in the metacognition and self-reflection they need to try to kind of really grapple with those specific skills. This is one of my favorite examples of using ChatGPT I've seen so far. And again, it's that feedback that students need. Okay, so here's my next poll. Thinking about All-Skate and using technology to get all of our students involved, what ideas do you have for All-Skate activities in courses? So I'm going to again ask you to kind of talk about this with a neighbor, come up with an idea or two, maybe something you've seen, maybe something inspired by something I just shared. And I'm going to ask you to report via Poll Everywhere. And this will not be a word cloud, so feel free to use sentences. All right? Ready, set, go. All right, last call for answers. Last call for responses. All right, I'm going to jump in here and show you my other favorite thing to do with ChatGPT these days. So Poll Everywhere is very thoughtfully scrolling these responses very slowly so that we can all read them together. Had I been doing this since you started, you could have read them as we went. But honestly, there's like 50 some odd responses at this point. That seems like a lot to read. So let's see. I need to hide this again. I'm going to go to response history. I'm going to download all those responses as a CSV file. Let's open that up. Let's grab all those responses. Hey, you guys went all, yeah, 91 responses. That's great. Now let's go to ChatGPT. I'm using the new 4.0 version right now because I pay 20 bucks a month. What 4 themes do you see in this list of responses? And then I will paste those in. Oops. I pressed the wrong button, I think. Oh, you're right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that makes it slightly less. It's more anticlimactic than I was expecting. Let's go to the question I actually asked you and try that. There we go. Now I'll grab your answers. 64 of them. I'll go to ChatGPT and paste. There's always an experiment when I do this. I've only done it like 4 times live. There we go. All right. Thank you, ChatGPT. Let's see what you have to say. It didn't OCR everything. I don't think it needed to, but that's okay. Interactive and group activities like Think, Pair, Share, team-based learning with debates, breakout groups. Technology and online tools, Google Docs, Google Slides, polling. See what it did there? It recognized all 3 of those as polling. I mean, it didn't know that Poll Everywhere was Poll Ev, but it pulled those together. Student choice and flexibility, giving students options, providing a menu of tasks. Feedback and evaluation, like exit surveys, peer evaluations. It's put polling there again too. Not ideal, not perfect, but pretty good. Okay, here's my real question. How many of you had an answer that kind of falls in one of those 4 buckets? That's not my real question. My real question is, how many of you have an answer that doesn't fall in one of those 4 buckets? Okay, handful of folks. I'm not going to dive into all those, but I think this is an interesting way to do a polling question that's an all-state activity where you get lots of responses from lots of students, but you have a little help analyzing those responses live during class, right? The thing about the multiple choice is you got the nice bar graph. You can kind of play off of that as an instructor really easily, or even the word cloud is pretty easy to parse and respond to. But when you've got 60 sentence level responses, it's hard to parse all that, right? ChatGPT could help. So if we wanted to, we could talk about each of those 4 buckets, and then I could call on some folks who feel like their answers are not in those buckets, right? That would be a nice way to do a class discussion. All right. Thank you for letting me do a little live experiment with you. I did one time ask ChatGPT for 3 or 4 themes when I did this, and it gave me 8, which was less helpful, right? ChatGPT is famously bad at math. I think it's actually better if you ask for a specific number, if you ask for 4 themes as opposed to 3 or 4. But anyway, okay. Oh, I forgot. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next principle here. We talked about practice and feedback, using technology to help more students engage in that process. This next principle goes in a different direction. I'm going to show you an image. I want you to identify what the image represents, but only when I say go. This is a ready, set, go kind of question, but it's going to be a choral response. So when I say go, just shout out whatever you think the image represents. Okay? But don't say anything until I say go. Three, 2, 1, go. Little Red Riding Hood. Yes. So, by the way, props to this wonderful screen up here. It is so bright. The colors are great, right? Sometimes I do this and you can't see the wolf's claw on the left, right? So, Red Riding Hood. Okay, now you know the category. I'm going to show you a couple more. Same idea, choral response. Don't say anything. 1, 2, 3, go. 3 little pigs. Nice work, right? They made their house out of straw and then wood and then brick, right? Once again, the wolf is the problem. All right, here's the challenge round. This one's a little obscure. Ready, set, go. Princess and the Pea. All right. Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. I had to look this one up. I'm like, why do I even know this story? What is this about, right? It was this queen is trying to get her son married off to a princess, and no one's good enough for her son. And then some girl wanders in from the rain, and they put her up in a stack of mattresses, like 10 mattresses, and they put 1 pea at the bottom. And the next morning, she's like, I couldn't sleep all night. My mattress was so uncomfortable. And the conclusion was, she was so finicky, she must be a princess. What's the moral of that story? I have no idea. It's such a weird story. My point here, though, is that we can do a lot with visuals, right, to connect to the ideas that we want our students to learn. And more generally, multimodal work is really powerful. This is an image I found a while back. It's a satellite image from NASA of 2 rivers coming together, a confluence of 2 rivers in Paraguay. And it's my kind of representation for the idea that when we work in multiple modalities, we actually have good things happen. So the principle here, when students work with new material using different kinds of media, they are better able to learn that material. And I don't have time for a riff on learning styles here, but the point is multiple modalities are really helpful, not matching a particular modality, but using multiple modalities. So some examples of using technology to do this. Grad student at Vanderbilt back in the day, she's now at Stanford, Ayla Pamukchu, in Earth and Planetary Sciences. It's a little hard to see. I didn't have a good copy of what her students did, but they were doing Earth materials identification. So it's a lab with lots of microscopes. And the idea was you would have a sample of dirt or rock, and you would look at it under a series of microscopes and figure out what it is that you're looking at. What are the minerals? What are the materials? And so her students were really struggling with this. So she had them create flowcharts to help them, kind of decision tree flowcharts. What scopes to use when? Based on this result, would you go to this other scope and look for something else? And they would iterate, like all during the semester, they would go back and revise these flowcharts to help them kind of represent the skills that they were learning. More recently, Francesca Fiori teaches art. She's teaching at Temple University when I met her. She went all digital on this, right? She had students create these process maps where they were representing their process in these drawing classes, and they could use examples of their work, they could use other images, they could use words, they could use text, right? They're representing their learning in useful ways. And again, this was an iterative process. They would go back and revise these during the semester to help clarify their own learning, but also show her how they were thinking about this class. Or I talked to Kylie Korsnack, who's now at University of Richmond. She was another grad student at Vanderbilt. She would have her students do digital revisions in her English classes. So they would write an essay, and then later in the semester, they would revise it in some other medium. So the one on the left is actually kind of a choose your own adventure website based on an essay about the novel Frankenstein, I believe. And so that student had to really think about transitions in their arguments and how to turn those into an interactive story of sorts. The ones on the right are both about Hunger Games, and they chose to take their essays and use Prezi to kind of create this kind of visual mind map of their essays. They ended up thinking a lot about the structure of their essays and how they were working with examples in this case. Or I don't have an example of this, but Eric Detweiler teaches writing and rhetoric at Middle Tennessee State University down the road from me, and he has his students write an essay and then turn it into a podcast later for a particular audience. And it helps moving from the written word to the audio to really help them think about who their audience is and what role audience has in their writing. So again, multiple modalities through this revision process. I'm a big fan of podcasting. John Kane and I are both big fans of podcasting. So I do an audio assignment in my cryptography course. I've done this 4 years now. So we have 4 seasons of a course podcast where my students create 10 to 12-minute audio stories about different parts of the history of cryptography or current events in privacy issues and surveillance, right? And having them think about how can we tell a story through audio. This is a first-year writing seminar in a math department, which is bonkers, but it works. So not only do they do some storytelling through audio, but also how do I explain mathematical ideas through audio, which is a bit of a challenge, right? But it helps them craft those ideas. Now, this is one of my favorite XKCD comics. On the left, we have someone looking at a seating chart of the airplane, and it says select desired seat by clicking on the above chart. She looks at it, she clicks on the pilot seat. She has a grand old time. When we give our students some choice, sometimes we can be delightfully surprised by what they do. And that's one of the strengths of multimodal assignments, is it often opens up a whole set of choices for our students. So I want to show you a couple of videos of this in action. And for my Zoom friends, I'm going to try to make this work for them. Stop share. I'm going to share with that clicked. There. Oh, and now I need to join the audio. Okay. Following is oh, that's going to be a problem. Okay, so I needed to set this up before I switched over. So this is a student in a class on dystopian fiction. There is a clothing catalog company called J. Peterman Clothing Catalog. They are famous for their very verbose and poetic clothing descriptions. She created a mock website that looked like the J. Peterman Clothing Catalog, but the florid descriptions were about the labor conditions under which the clothes might have been produced. Okay?
For my project, I recreated the J. Peterman Company catalog website, but I changed the clothing descriptions to make them all about sweatshops to sort of put that labor at the forefront of where our clothes actually come from. The Hunger Games was a book that we read for the course, and in that we talked about the capital and the erasure of labor with it, how you can get your food and your products instantly without thinking about all of the people in the districts working really hard to give you those items. And so I sort of wanted to tie it into society in a more topic that I'm more familiar with, which is clothing. And so I decided to tie it into sweatshops and how when we buy our clothes, we just go to the store, buy it, wear it, and we don't think about the people that are making our stuff. I learned that there are still a lot of sweatshops in existence, in the US even. I sort of always thought they were in other places and we use those, but they're still in the United States. And I learned that we do need to put that labor at the forefront and sort of consider that when we make choices every day about the stuff we want to eat and the stuff we want to use. And we need to remember that there are people out there who can't stand up for themselves and can't sort of speak up, and we need to protect them and fight for them. I need to buy clothes from different places. I like to shop at H&M, Forever 21, Charlotte Russe, and those are all places that are known for using sweatshops in their clothing. I sort of always knew I wanted to go into activism maybe, and this has sort of showed me an idea of a pathway where I could go with it and something I could fight for and advocate for now that I'm familiar with the topic. So.
I love that story, right? So here's a young woman who has connected some of her personal interests and passions to this course. I wouldn't have expected a fake website on labor conditions in a course on dystopian fiction, but like, it's great. And I've labeled this an unessay because this is a term we hear now where instead of having students do a more traditional research-based argumentative essay, you allow them to create something different that still makes an argument and is still research-based. But it doesn't have to be an essay. It could be something of their own choosing. And so, for instance, there was another Vanderbilt professor, Larissa DeSantis, who taught in earth and environmental science, and she would have students represent what they were learning in her courses through some method of their choice. So these are some screenshots of a 6th grade lesson plan that some of her pre-service education majors made. They were learning how to make lesson plans in their other courses. They were learning science in Larissa's course. So they put these together, connecting their professional goals with this science course they were taking. And then there was another student in Larissa's course who had a very particular set of skills.
Guess it's true, there's a change you must understand. Over time, a type of plan got the upper hand. C4 plants started to expand because of low CO2 or the air and land. Oh, in the Miocene, all the grass was green. The C4 plants replaced C3 in the Miocene.
So what Augie had to do was to, so I should say, he was a member of Vanderbilt's award-winning a cappella group that year. That was the year they were actually on one of those singing shows on TV. Like, it was a really talented group that year. And so he knew how to do the music part of this, right? He could take a song, he could split it into parts, he could sing all the parts, he could record himself, he could integrate it, he's harmonizing with himself. What he had to do was find a song whose lyrics he could change to represent what he was learning about the Miocene epic, and then change those lyrics and produce this video. Larissa tells me his science is 100% dead on. And I just love this, right? Here's someone who kind of found himself in a really creative way. And this would never have existed if Larissa had given her students a more traditional research-based paper at the end of this. I love this kind of form of science communication. Okay, I'm gonna share this way, and I think we're back. Oh, that's good. Let me share one quick story, then I have a polling question for you. So this is a picture I took when I was out running a few years ago. I used to be more of a runner than I am now. I have a 2-year-old, so I never have time to go running. But I was out running, and it was this beautiful trail I was running on. I think that's beautiful. I was scared out of my mind, though, however, because the night before, I had binge watched 5 episodes of The Walking Dead, the zombie TV show. And so that may look pretty, but I was all alone, and all I could see were zombies everywhere, right? And I mention this because what I had created for myself inadvertently was an undesirable difficulty. This happens more often when I'm traveling and I want to go running somewhere. Sometimes I can head out of the hotel and find a green space and I can just run. Other times I have to take an Uber across town to some city park and then run, right? The running is supposed to be hard. That's why I'm doing it. It's how I get in shape. It's how I keep my heart healthy. The cost and time of Ubering across town is an undesirable difficulty, right? It's just in the way. And I think this is something that's really useful to think about in general in teaching, but especially when we think about these kind of multimodal things. I think as instructors, part of our role is to try to maximize the desirable difficulties, right? When learning is hard because it's supposed to be, that's okay. We should be creating those experiences for students where they have to struggle. But let's try to minimize the undesirable difficulties. And that could be the design of your course online, right? Where students have to spend 30 minutes trying to find stuff. It could also mean that if a student can make an argument through a parody website instead of a traditional paper, they are showing you what they know. The traditional paper might be an undesirable difficulty for them, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe they need to learn how to write that, and sometimes that's appropriate. But this is one of the things that I think multimodal helps us do, is to kind of maybe give students some more choices so they can represent their learning in ways that are really meaningful to them. Okay, I'm checking the time. Okay, we're going to punt in this way. I'm not going to do my third principle. You have the slides. That will be your DVD bonus content for those of you who are old enough to appreciate DVD bonus content. Okay. I want to share one more example because I want to talk about AI just for a minute too. This was an assignment I did in that statistics course where I was having my students do data visualization, visual thinking through infographics. So they had to find some data, ask some statistical questions about it using the tools that we had covered in the class, and then represent the answers visually through an infographic. And so I got a quarter of the projects were about baseball, right? But they got to pick a topic, right? So a little bit of that un-essay feel. The format was specified, but their topic they had a lot of choice in. And I thought recently, okay, we've been worried about AI doing the writing for students. What else can AI do? Well, look at that one on the left. They mapped pizza prices versus income level in the county where Vanderbilt was. So I went to Claude, one of the AIs out there, Claude by Anthropic, and I asked if I wanted to create an infographic comparing pizza prices at restaurants in a particular county with income level information, what might I show in that infographic and how could I organize that visually? Claude wouldn't make the infographic for me. It's not that powerful. Check back next year, who knows? But it gave me a great list of things to put in my infographic. I won't read through all that. Many of those things are in the ones that my students produce, but there's a couple of things they didn't think to do that Claude suggested that would have been good suggestions, right? I went through the learning objectives for this assignment. I have about 16 things students need to do in this kind of end of semester project. Again, you don't have to read them all. The ones in yellow are the ones where I feel like AI could be helpful to students, could play a role in helping them do that piece, or maybe do it for them, right? Whether it's a shortcut or an assistant, I don't know. But I think that's where we are now, is that on those list of assignments, like these are the things I want students to do. A lot of it is things where AI could come and play some role. And so I think that's something that we maybe didn't have to worry about last year when we talked about multimodal assignments, but now we do. Okay. That said, keep getting thrown out. That clock is 3 minutes fast. One more quick story. So this is from my wife, Emily. She is a marketing manager for Zondervan Academic. It's a publisher of academic books in the kind of religious area. She was marketing a book called Know the Theologians this year, profiles of different Christian theologians over the centuries. She wanted to create some digital swag for people who pre-ordered the book. So she wanted to create theologian trading cards. It's just lovely. She had a graphic designer. She also had an AI tool. The name just fell out of my head. It's one of the ones that a lot of marketers use now. Jasper, maybe? Jasper? Did I make that up? Doesn't matter. She would go to the AI tool and ask it to generate images of these particular theologians. And, well, I interviewed her for my podcast, and she said, AI doesn't think that women are theologians, apparently. Among other things, it got wrong, right? So she would ask for, if she asked for an image of Martin Luther, it did a good job, right? It knows what Martin Luther looks like, and it can give you an image of Martin Luther. But when she asked for other theologians or groups of theologians, it would get the gender wrong, it would get the number wrong. It would get, this is the arcane part, like the headgear that certain orders would have, right? You would expect this particular bishop to have a certain headgear, and it had no idea, right? She had to go to the authors of the book and vet all these images and kind of make sure that they were correct. And so this leads me to the conclusion that I keep coming back to, and I don't know if everyone would agree with me on this. I've been reading Jose Bowen's book on teaching with AI, and he goes in a different direction. But I think expert AI use requires expertise. We are still there where we need some experts to weigh in. She had her skill as an artist. She had the graphic designer. She had the authors of the book. We're all vetting what came out of the AI. So yes, there's a chance for AI to play a role in a lot of these assignments, but also we still need to develop our students' expertise so they can evaluate what they get from AI. Okay, so I'm going to end with this poll here. I'm going to go back to poll everywhere. One of these windows. So this is a clickable image question. I wanted to show you one of these as well. This is another of my experiment. I've never done this style before. So I took the slide sorter view for my slides, turned that into a screenshot, and now I'm curious, of the examples I just went through, which of them seem most useful or interesting to you in your context? And you should just be able to tap on the image in your Poll Everywhere interface. Not much bigger. It should be the same session as before. A lot of fans of that music video. All right. Now I know what slides to leave out of my next talk. Thank you. That was great. Oh, right. We didn't even get to that part. Oh, well, that's okay. There we go. Thank you for your time and attention today. I appreciate it with all the fun technology that we got to use today. Do stay in touch. That QR will take you to my website where you can learn more about my podcast and my newsletter. Lots more we could talk about, but I appreciate you spending a little time with me this afternoon. And I think I'll turn it back over to Judy.
Thank you, Dr. Derek Bruff. That was really cool, right? Do you have new ideas now for things to try in the fall? So also in the fall, keep an eye out for Factual Award nominations. Think about who you can nominate on your campus. Keep an eye out for IITG grant awards or applications. So think about what you might want to do on your campus. And by then, we'll let you know where CIT 2025 will be. So have an awesome summer and a safe trip home.